Good evening. Welcome to the RSU 5 Board of Directors. It is Wednesday, March 20th, 2024, and we are here in the Freeport High School Library. We have a few folks that are not with us this evening, and we're not sure about Candy. Hopefully she will join us, but we will get started in the meantime with the Pledge of Allegiance. Do I have a motion for consideration and approval of the minutes from the March 13, 2024 meeting as presented, barring any errors or omissions? Thank you, Malik and Mara. All those in favor? Great. None opposed. Adjustments to the agenda.
I have one this evening. Under number 8, reports from the superintendent, I'm going to add a letter B. What I would like to do is move the current A to that B slot, and my letter A will be a resignation to announce to the board.
Okay. All right. So we will move on to 6, good news and recognition, and we will look to Lily for our report from our student rep.
Thank you so much. I'm going to start with a note from our principal. Okay, this Tuesday, March 26th, the Freeport High School will be hosting a virtual parent workshop about teenagers and vaping and nicotine use with speakers from Portland Public Health. This 1-hour webinar will provide data and information about vape and nicotine use among students and connect families with support resources. We hope you will join us for this informative event, and please see the emailed flyer to register. At Freeport High School, students in the senior class have been getting into more colleges as regular decision results come out in late March. We've also had very exciting senior projects, which have been sparking a lot of recent conversation as students pick project ideas, get approved or not, and make revisions. With finals coming up for us shortly, most people are excited to get working on their projects. The band concert, as you mentioned earlier, led by Sean McEwen, happened this past Monday, where the FHS concert band partnered with Casco Bay Wind Ensemble for Music in Our Schools Month. The performance was excellent and gave students an opportunity to see both a professional ensemble in action and see like a possible career in music. We also have 2 upcoming performances, which is Pops Night in the spring and Arts Night, which will have the choir, band, and visual artists. And finally, this will be addressed later, but today the student body has noticed the absence and recent resignation of Luke Engelbert. While there's been a lot of talk, we trust the board to handle the situation with student safety in mind, as they've always done. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. It was a great concert on Monday night because it was very cool because it was not just our band and getting to watch another band. Like they played a piece together, which was very cool. So thank you for that. It was wonderful. And thank you for the report. All right, so we will move on to number 7, which is public comment. We give people an opportunity. Look to Cynthia because she usually keeps track of that. I'm seeing no. All right, so we will move on to number 8, which is the report from the superintendent.
Okay, letter A, a resignation. I'm announcing the resignation of Luke Engelbert, FHS 0.5 science teacher and 0.5 ed tech. And letter B, the FY25 budget update. We have a brief PowerPoint for the board that we'd like to present so that we can share some of the information that you asked us to come back with last time. So it'll take us just a minute to set that up. Kelly's so good, she already has it pulled up. Okay. So here we are again with the superintendent's proposed budget for next year this evening. And our first slide is just to look where we've been and where we're going. This evening, the board will have an opportunity to have deliberations. Next week, we will have public input again, and the board will adopt the budget. Followed by we have 3 Q&A sessions on the 10th at Pownell, the 24th of April at DCS, the high school at May 8th. And then on the 15th will be our annual budget meeting, and June 11th, the budget validation referendum, just to remind members of the public where those opportunities are. We were asked to come back and have some conversations about some work we did on the reserve accounts. I will mention in the Article 2, there were some questions about the 6 educational technicians that were in the reserve accounts. We reviewed where we had ed techs before. We have had 6 or more openings all year that have been funded either through the local entitlement grant, those monies, or some through local. So we've had 6 we've been unable to fill all year. It wasn't that they weren't needed or we didn't want to have them. We just were unable to fill them. So that's why we pushed them into a reserve account. There was another question at that time about what would happen, what it would look like to the budget if we push those 6 ed techs into the requests we have this year. If we push those ed techs into the request for local budget this year, it would mean on the expenditure side an overall increase of 7.09%. The tax impact would be district-wide 829 overall. That would mean for Durham 7.35, Freeport 5.12, and Pownell 6.74. There was another question we were asked to address about maintenance of effort. This would not affect our need to meet the maintenance of effort standard, because that standards are based on actual expenditures, and we didn't expend it because we didn't hire those folks this year. So it would not affect that. We're not worried about that piece. Another reserve account, we were asked to come back. There was a question about the halftime guidance position that we've requested in the local side at Durham. If we could create a reserve account for that in case we were unable to fill a halftime position. And we have done that there. You'll see there's the 47,500 for Article 5 because that's where guidance lives. And that's half of what we budget, which is the 95,000 for a full-time position for teachers. The 8 and the he, that remained the same. Go down the tennis courts. We were asked to look at where was it and what was the proposal for that replacement work to be done. And I found documentation back to 2019, and there were some estimates that were received. One was a phone call estimate, one was a more hard written one, and the estimate was $225,000. The plan I see that the board had said we're going to contribute $35,000 for 7 years to have a total of $245,000 in the bucket for replacement. So that was what we came across. Moving on to capital, we were asked to it was a concern we would deplete that down to nothing. So we were asked to add that $475,000 for capital in there, which we did. We adjusted the Pownell septic system slightly. We had 450 in there originally, if you remember, and we reduced it to 350 based on the conversations that we've had with the folks designing that system. So if we did with those figures pushed in, it would be your balance would remain at $500,175. In the total now with those other things we've now pushed in, at the bottom you'll see the reserve account total funding that we would appropriate $1,334,500 from undesignated fund balance. We look at this, and this was what we shared last week. We were looking at what we had and would estimate to be an unallocated fund balance, and we added a slide to look at If this correlates back with number 6 on the previous side, that this is the estimated ending balance after the 23-24 budget. We're proposing to push in 900,000 from undesignated fund balance and also to transfer the 1,334,500. That's from undesignated for the reserve accounts. So that would leave you with a balance for unallocated funds of $2,402,031. And this is, we have to remember, that would be plus anything that's not spent in this fiscal year. So that's what it would be, plus anything we didn't spend this year. That would be pushed into unallocated fund balance. So we move on to looking at, this is just to remind everyone where we start. It's always good to say, where do we start? When our team met, we had initial requests of, and this is on the expenditure side, an increase of 10.35%. The budget we presented to the board on February 7th was at 6.5%, and the one we presented last week was down to 6.48%. So that's where it is now. And then the next slide is simply, you'll see again, just to remind you by article where those all are. So for this evening, what we'd like you to do, we presented the budget that we feel that the things that we need for operations of the schools, and we really need some direction of the board tonight. If there's anything we've presented that we need to know we have support for that, and also looking at, when you're looking at that 6.48%, looking at what's the increase to the taxpayers, but we're looking for some direction. If there's something else you would like to look at for where next week is, you'll be adopting the budget.
Thank you, Jean. I always appreciate when you start out answering all the questions we had last week, so we can start tonight with full notes. All right. So the board, we will get to our deliberations on the budget a little bit later, not too much later, like based on the looks of who's in the audience, like a minute later. But we do have the opportunity for public input on the budget on the agenda. And this will be on the agenda for next week as well, in advance of the board deliberating and presumably adopting the budget. So anyone who's watching from home, I would encourage you, if you have thoughts around the budget or questions around the budget, this is an opportunity to come and share them with us. And, we can use that information as we deliberate and adopt the budget. So just a reminder that that opportunity is on the agenda for next week as well. And once we adopt it, we will also have sort of the public Q&As, but at that point, the board has already adopted the budget. So this is really the public's chance to ask questions or provide feedback, excuse me, in advance of the adoption. Because what we decide next week is what will go to the 3-town annual budget meeting in May. Okay. There isn't anybody. Okay. I always want to give a minute. I don't want anyone to feel like we rush them if they wanted to share something. Okay. So then we will move on because this is an added meeting to the agenda. We don't have any administrator reports, board comments, policy review. Really all that's left is the board's deliberation on the proposed budget. So we can pick up where we left off last week. We have the majority of our administrators here. So if folks had additional questions that came to them over the last week, we can look to get those answered, or we can just start right in with, what are people's comfort level with the budget as presented? What's your pleasure? Nothing? Danielle.
I guess I have a question for Glenn. Can I start with that? Is that okay? I just was wondering, looking at your list of potential projects for
Mhm.
next year,
Mhm.
if you would like, is there an order of importance, like which ones you would want to get done first? Or does that?
Yes. So I know the PA system and the phone systems are a huge priority list for myself and the board. Also, going through the audit results. So to answer your question, I'd love to be able to do all of them, understanding that we can't. So life safety is priority in my book. Same thing with Gene. So I would love to tackle those, get the PA systems, get the phone systems up and running, get that addressed if we could. Then I would take care of, the septic system. We got 2 issues there. We got the leach field that we're working through. Then we have a line that we need to repair inside the school. So I would go PA system, I would go septic system, and then see where we are financially after that. But I think the PA system and the phone lines are going to take a majority of those funds.
And you're talking about for the remainder of this year? Or are you talking about
I
next
was
year?
talking about next year.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if I can get some done this year too, but not knowing how everything lines up, I priority to get those done. Either we get them done this year, first next year, either way.
So then the stuff on your list.
Yep.
That would get pushed.
Well, we'd look and see where we are with the remaining balance, but also we would take a look at where we're at with the energy audit and see, because we may be able to tie some of those into it. But to answer your question, those would be the ones I would love to get done first. Absolutely.
Colin.
Yeah, I guess, Glenn, since we have you, I think so. Just to be very clear about it, in terms of the proposed projects that were on the presentation earlier, the gym roof, the additional single stall bathrooms for the high school, for the middle school, the parking lot extension, the modular classroom ceiling, those would be the things that would be we'd be looking at either bumping, or we would be we use any remaining funds, but those would probably be the things that would be kicked out to the following year.
Yeah, we would restructure, see where we have for priority wise based on the remaining funds we have left.
Yep. Okay.
Maura.
Thank you. I see that in the initial request, the capital funding's increase was considered for 170,000. I know we had asked the facilities committee to talk about if on an ongoing basis we should be putting more money in the capital fund. Could you talk a little bit about that initial 170, because now it's down to 45?
Yeah, so I think when we talked about, we were looking at adding the 45 to the 400. Correct me if I'm wrong, Michelle, to there. So I apologize, I don't have that right in front of me right now, but
I think I know the answer if you want me to jump in and help.
please, that'd be great.
I think the difference is 125 went into the capital reserve for the COP grant. So the whole 170 is done, but 125 of it is coming from unexpended fund balance to the reserve account. So that way, if we get the grant, it's there because there has to be matching dollars. And if we don't, then it's in the reserve account to be used for whatever we need it for. If we kind of go through what's in the current operating budget and still have more needs. So, and then 45 was added to what had historically been 400 is now 445 in the operating budget.
Okay, great. So that was sort of some creative thinking about applying for grant funds
Yes.
to reduce that line. Okay.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions or while I'm here?
So I guess my question is the PA system. So those were the things that were on this year's list, right? That's the question. And we didn't get those done because we were worried about the septic system. We now know that we can't get the septic system done this year.
Correct.
Given timing and approvals and all those sort of things.
Correct.
So how much was left that we haven't expended from this year?
I think it's 155.
Okay. And so the question is can we get the stuff that we wanted to do with those 155 done between now and June 30? Is that the concern?
That's the hope. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yep. I
So-
know that Moore Street, I believe bids have been opened up. I think Gene can allude more to that. So I know we're already looking at the Moore Street, working with Sam. I know we're taking a look at over at Durham. I know we looked at the middle school. I don't think any of that's gone out to bid yet, but I'd love to be able to put something together possibly, depending on where we're at the end of the Moore Street project.
Yep. And some of it might get tied into that energy audit opportunity where we
It
could,
very well could. Yeah.
Yeah.
That, the fire alarm panels, all that can be a part of that process.
Yeah.
We're not there yet. So if we can tie that in and make that part of a phase one, that'd be great. I just don't know that yet.
okay.
Yep.
And if we have the funds to do it out of our operating budget, we can get that and just pull it right off the top of the
Absolutely.
Okay.
100%. Yep.
other questions for,
I mean, this is this is for you, Glenn, but it really is really for us. But just to Michelle's earlier question of sort of where we are, how we are in terms of our comfort level, and in terms of Jean's question of direction, I think like I have confidence that you're looking at things and putting things together in absolutely the right way, and that you're juggling all the different elements that we need to be juggling. I think I'm just a little uncomfortable. Again, this is not with you. This is sort of from a sort of overall kind of capital planning and budgeting perspective, with kind of like with sort of getting into a pattern of like having $300,000 of things that we need to have done, but no, we're going to kick them to the following year because we're not budgeting for them. I'm just uncomfortable with that. Similarly, this will come up later in other lines, but where I'm uncomfortable with funding positions that we know we need through unsustainable funding sources. So I think I mean, again, I guess I'm giving you an opportunity if there's anything in there that you feel like responding to, but I just like, in terms of facilities, in terms of capital projects, I'm uncomfortable kind of always feeling like we're $250,000 or $300,000 behind. And that just doesn't seem like, that just seems like that's setting us up at a variety of levels for problems down the road, problems that are not caused by you.
Exactly. But honestly, to the defense of that, I think the energy audit is going to help address that. We have the opportunity to look at what the items were identified and how we want to address those as a district. So the phase one project hypothetically could be lighting, could be envelopes of the doors, could be fire alarm panels, could be PA systems, depending on how all that the funding lines up. But that project could be whatever you want it to be. That's the beauty of it. Also, in a phase two, we could certainly do ventilation. Phase three, we could do roofs. We can customize this to however we would like to be able to do it. So I understand what you're saying. Always feel like with $300,000 behind it, but we have an opportunity to take a huge swing if that's what the board chooses to do, to get ahead of it instead of always feeling like we're behind it. I don't know if that helps with your comfort level, but I'm really glad that we had the opportunity to do the audit since I'm so new to the district, being here 8 months. It provides an opportunity to look at something from a third perspective on some of the issues that I've been talking about with Jean, so we can bring that to the board's attention to be able to address.
Yeah. I mean, would you say that the gym roof would be something that potentially the energy audit would reveal,
Absolutely.
and the bathrooms?
Yep.
The carpet.
Well, carpet, so there's no real benefit to that. However, though, but if you are doing a project inside the school, for an example, if we're going to replace unit ventilators, chances are we would take that out. Now we would have an opportunity. If you want to replace the carpet, you can make that part of your project. It's no energy savings from it, but it can tie into that project. Now, the gym roof, that's the last roof up here at the high school. That's a ballast roof, and it's time. Does it necessarily need to be done right now? No, not necessarily. However, there are benefits to it if you are going to replace some of your rooftop equipment. You are going to have a crane. Now that's an opportunity to do your roof while you're addressing some of the other benefits to the energy audit. So they all can be tied in indirectly.
and I
not.
think what we have found is because we put this big chunk, and I don't know this to be 100% fact, but I feel like it's true when I talk to other folks. Not everyone does that, right? So the fact that we have a list where we say these are the things that are going to need to be replaced, and it's a little bit of a puzzle every year of like, okay, what's popped to the top of the list? Obviously, no one anticipated the septic leach field dying, and there's your $300,000 right there, right? So had that not happened, we would have done what we expected to get done this year. It's always a matter of priority, right? if you went back and looked at the facilities, the previous facility director's plan for the capital funding at the beginning of the year versus what got done, it always changes because things are always changing, right? So things we don't know are going to happen, and we need to juggle, right? So the good news is we have things like the gym roof on the budget now, where it's not pouring into the gym floor and it's an emergency. It's like, okay, we know this is coming. We've got a plan for this, but it's not emergent at the moment. And I think that's what allows us the flexibility to juggle a little bit. So, I mean, septic system was just a bit of a fluke, I guess. Although it's been there for a long time, so maybe we should have known. But thankfully, there's only 2 septic systems in the district. And I think Glenn's looking at the Durham one. just to
I
make
am.
sure we're
Yes,
good.
I'm scheduling that up. Yeah.
Yeah.
So every 15 to 20 years, you want to take a look at it.
Yeah.
So we're going to go take a look.
So, I mean,
Absolutely.
I don't think it's uncommon to see that kind of. This was a big chunk for sure, like undeniable. But I don't think it's uncommon to see that a bit. So, if that helps at all.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention from my understanding of the results from the energy audit that it really gave us a much deeper understanding of where our really urgent needs will be in the next few years so that we can maybe make some of those prioritizations as we move forward as a district in the coming years. But also just emphasize again that the energy savings that we should get if we should decide to go forward with this project will help pay for some of these other priority items.
Absolutely.
That's the goal.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anything else for Glenn? Shall we let him off the hook for now? Thank you.
Going once.
Oh, don't go out of the building.
Oh, no, I won't.
Maura.
I have a question about the reserve account for the capital reserve. Michelle, could you explain? I know we asked for the $475,000 to be added. Does that move it into the reserve from undesignated funds, or where does that move it from?
Yes.
Can you describe?
Yeah, all of these reserve funds that are getting added based on the recommendations, both original and then additions from last week, are coming from the undesignated fund balance. So we have a fair amount sitting in undesignated fund balance, and we're going to need to start bringing that down to get back in line with what the state recommends / requires. And so this is one way to do that and stay in compliance with those percentages.
So for this, thank you. For this anticipated addition of the $475,000, is that then going to potentially cover some of these proposed capital projects that are on the list for
Yes.
next year? So
Yeah.
we would anticipate using that, and then that's not in the budget, and that would kind of get replenished every year, and we would use what we need out of it for capital projects.
Right. So we would still keep our 445 in the operating budget, right? So that's how we've historically done it. And then the capital reserve fund has historically been used for kind of emergency situations. So it is very possible we could have chosen to access the $500,000 that is already in the capital reserve fund to do the septic system at Pownell, right? That is I think a reasonable use of those funds. We didn't plan on it. We weren't expecting it. It popped up. It turns out we're able to sort of budget it another way, but that's essentially how we're doing it, right? So we're going to take the 350 out of there. And then my concern was we were taking the 350, and I think it was 450 originally is what we were estimating, but not replenishing it. So we were essentially expecting to walk away after the end of next year with only $50,000 in that capital reserve fund, which to me seemed irresponsibly low in case something happened, right? So I think the only thing I can think of off the top of my head where we've accessed that is we lost a section of a boiler, I think at the high school, some years back, and we had to buy one like on the spot. And so we accessed the capital reserve fund. This reserve fund, I don't know, I'll look to Kelly on this. This was not something that has always been in place. This has sort of been over the last, I don't know, when it was implemented. But I feel like, getting that up to the $500,000 level, we did sort of over time with the goal of trying to keep it there. So if we use it, try to replenish it, kind of thing.
Yeah, it was here when I was here in my previous time here at RSU 5. We had implemented it during that time. I think it was in the last year of Dr. Welsh's time here at RSU 5, but I can find the actual establishment date. But the reason, and I just want to, the reason we didn't tap into it this year for the panel septic system and we put the other projects on hold because that's not really been a topic of discussion, is because every year when you create your annual budget meeting warrant, you actually have to authorize the voters have to authorize the board to expend from this capital reserve through that warrant. And unfortunately, that warrant article was not included in last year's annual budget meeting warrant. So we weren't able to tap into this emergency reserve fund that we have for capital projects because we didn't have authority to actually expend from it this year because we didn't have the article. You'll be sure that all of those articles are on the warrant this year.
Thank you for that clarification. Other questions? Well, I know Colin has something to say about another line item because he alluded to it. So you ready for that conversation?
Sure. I think it's just the. I mean, it goes. I guess it's the reserve accounts for Article 1 and Article 2. The grade 5 MLS teacher, the multilingual teacher, and then the 6 ed techs for special ed. We talked about this at the last meeting, but I just can't see how by budgeting for them in this way and by basically saying we do need them, we're not just giving ourselves a situation where as we go into the budget process next year, we're starting with $440,000 of staff that we already have, like that's already like that we've already hired. We've already budgeted. We've already, like, hopefully we'll be able to hire all 6 ed techs. Hopefully we'll have a grade 5 teacher for Emily and a multilingual teacher as well, right? They'll be here, they'll be working, and we will still need them. And then we will have to automatically just drum up $440,000 because we can't use the reserve account summaries. So I think my question is not about the need for those positions at all. It's just about the different logics of what happens when we put them in the budget, not as reserve account, reserve fund spending. Are we being honest with ourselves about what we're doing next year? Are we then also being clear with Jean, like to basically be like, okay, like you can like all those other things like need to be like $440,000 less because like you don't have like we know going in like your wish list is going to have to be lower. So I just wanted to have a conversation about the various ways of thinking about that.
I'll respond to that a little bit, but I'll do it by each article column. So the first one, the grade 5 teacher, we're not certain we need that teacher. We're watching enrollment. We're not certain we're going to hire that position at all. Multilingual teacher, we're looking at what we have for resident students right now. We have 3 teachers in your local budget that we have. We're going to maintain those 3 teachers. We're not certain we need a 4th. Our worry is if in August that there's a big influx of children again, we'll need that multilingual teacher. So that's why that's there. We don't want to put it in the regular because we're really not certain on this, but this allows us the flexibility of grade 5 and because we'd be okay now, but in grade 5 enrollment, sometimes for some reason over the summer, it happened last summer, they're all in the same grade level, that they were coming in the same grade level, that we would be able to hire a teacher and that we'd be able to hire a multilingual teacher. We may not hire these at all. Sure.
Just since we're going piece by piece, but
Sure.
My understanding is since we're hiring a grade 4 teacher, we know that for certain, and those grade 4 students will become grade 5 students the following year.
Mhm.
Do we need this grade 5? I'm looking at you, Emily, but also Jane can do we need that grade 5 teacher in what would be the academic? What's that? The following year.
And that's
based on the numbers of who's coming through.
And it's hard to say because we don't know what the enrollment will be. And also it might be, let's say we have, I'm just gonna use this for example, an incoming third grade class is really, really low. And we say, oh, we only need 4 positions. We'll shift someone. So it's hard to plan that far. It could happen. You're absolutely right. It could happen. But it's too hard out to predict that with enrollment. So that's why we say I say it's like the emergency break glass. Like if this happens, if lots more children come in grade 5 and we say, oh my goodness, we do need this teacher. Or if all of a sudden we have a lot more multilingual learners that come in, we're going to need another teacher too. And then we've got nowhere to go except the local. So that's why we're saying put it here. And once it's there, it's there. So that, let's say neither of those scenarios played out. You're going to still have that total, that 190, that's going to sit there next year. And if you don't access it. So it's not going to go away. It's not going to go pump back, into the undesignated fund balance. It will stay right there for that, for whatever purpose that you were going to use it for next year. So that's that one.
And I just want to throw something else in there is historically how we've tackled this question mark around, cusp positions, right? Like maybe we do, maybe we don't, is we've always had a contingency of 187. So,
I think
168, I don't know, somewhere in there between
the
150 and 200. So essentially 2 positions worth of spending in this contingency line item. In which case, if we said, okay, we need a 5th grade teacher, we could access the funds for there. So we would essentially be in the same position the following year. Like, hey, we had to add a position out of contingency last year, and we're going to keep it going forward. So it's not necessarily. It looks a little different because instead of a contingency line item on the budget, which is now gone, that line item is 0 this year. We're doing it through the reserve accounts in a way of keeping it sort of designated to the articles, as opposed to how it worked for contingency is if we didn't use it, it just rolled back into undesignated fund balance and we do it again the next year.
So you're saying it's gone as in the funds are gone from this year, or it's gone from next year's budget?
It's gone from next year's budget. As far as I know, we didn't access the contingency funds this year.
That is correct.
Yeah. So that actually is one of the savings you'll see in the booklet, right? It's one of the line items that went down. I guess that would tell us how much it was. I guess I don't see it.
So it is there. It's on page 7. And if you're working your way up from the bottom, it's 1, 2, 3,
217.
4, 5, 6. And we had 2 contingencies within the budget. We had
Special
a
ed.
regular education contingency and we had a special education contingency. So there was one in Article 1 and there was one in Article 2 as well. And the total of both of them was 217. And we have removed all contingencies from the operating budget with the establishment of these reserve funds.
Okay.
And so ultimately what was happening is those reserve funds, right? We would tax for them every year, whether or not we used them. And then they would dump into undesignated fund balance, which kind of compounds undesignated fund balance if you're doing it every year and you don't tap into it. Whereas the establishment of the reserve funds, you're actually utilizing that undesignated fund balance for your contingency without an impact each year that then just dumps in and adds.
And it used to be that you would see a other revenue line, it would say contingency. So basically it would be like, hey, we collected $150,000 last year in contingency. We didn't use it. It rolled to undesignated fund balance. We're going to put that back in. So once we funded it once, we didn't keep collecting it every year. Although the special ed one, I think we did, because I think we just pulled the regular education one. So really when you saw undesignated fund balance usage in the revenue line of 750,000, it was actually 750,000 plus that contingency. Like we broke it out, but really it was all undesignated fund balance. If that makes sense. Kelly.
Could you remind me again what the percentage increase this would result in if we actually pushed this back into the budget? You mentioned it briefly and it kind of went past my head quickly.
Sure. This was only, Kelly, we were asked to look at the 6 educational technicians. So we looked at that. So it would be just with that add, the On the expenditure side, it was 7.09% increase overall on the expenditure side, 8.29 tax impact for the district. For Durham, it's 7.35, Freeport 5.12, and Pownell 6.74.
And that was only for the 6 ed techs, but I assume if we
Correct.
pushed these other 2 teachers into that local budget, it would go even higher. I have a
Right.
question. We just renewed contracts, so our salaries are getting a big hit this year, correct? Of the amount that they're impacting
Well,
our
we're
budgets.
we're still in negotiations for educators. We did settle the support professionals contract. So those are in there, but we have not settled the teacher's contract yet. The
Okay.
educator's contract.
So basically from 6.48 to 7.09 to add those 6 ed techs.
And because we have the magic spreadsheet, if you add those 2 teaching positions in as well, it pushes it to 7.58 year over year with an 8.91 on taxation. I don't want to throw too many numbers out and do all the towns again, but just so you know, if we were to add the 2 at 195, 2 teachers at 95,000 apiece, and then the 240, it's an additional 430,000. You'd be pushing back into the local budget for
Just over a point.
7.58.
Yeah.
year over
So
year.
I think maybe what some of the confusion is the anticipated reserve balance of 0 for each of them. I think that's a little confusing because to me that implies that we fully anticipate using these funds. And when I hear about the grade 5 teacher and the multilingual teacher, it's we may need those and we want to have access in case we do need those. And I won't hold you to this, but maybe I will. Like what are the odds you're giving on these? Is this like 90% we're going to need this teacher? Or is this 40% we're going to need this teacher?
We can't. I look at it. Evaluation was like, we really can't judge. And it was funny. Last summer, it was 1 grade level. Every child that registered at Mass Landing was in that grade level. So we really can't tell. Also, there will be some move outs over the summer. That always happens. We just don't know. The grade 4, we feel, that's why it's in the local. That's when we're saying, yes, we need, but this one, that'd be a big chunk to put in there and we don't know. And multilingual, that's frankly a wild card for us that we have no knowledge what would happen with that.
And then if this 5th grade teacher was added, does that basically cap you out for space there? Like you would have the same number for all 3 grade levels? Because I know it's like you said, sometimes they go up and down, but eventually like over Durham, it was always like some are 2, some are 3, and we play with the numbers and now everybody's 3 just based on growth.
Capped out is kind of it's relative, right? So
I mean, you have to accept them when they show
every
up.
room right now we have 1 open room because the preschool has moved out. If we had at some point I anticipate we'll be at 555 just based on enrollment trends. When we get to that point, then we would start having to get creative. If we're looking at 6 classes a grade, if that's what you're asking way down the road, then we have to get more creative. But we wouldn't have kids in yurts, yet out in on the soccer field.
They
or
might love
anything. I know, sounds great.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think just the clarity there on what happened to the contingency fund and how the contingency fund is basically is transforming into the regular instruction reserve fund. That's super helpful. And I think also just if I'm going to sort of give back what I understood is that we're not expecting to, we're hoping that we don't need to tap into that, but we are also creating a little bit of a pattern for ourselves where that is our contingency fund. That is the thing that we've had every year where we give ourselves about 2 positions worth of cushion. So that is a fund that if we did use those, if we did need the grade 5 teacher and the multilingual teacher, we would, as a matter of practice, because that's what we've done, kick another 190 into it. Because that's what we do. We've been having that contingency fund. It's just structured differently. So it's not like this is a one-time thing. Again, with all your point totally taken of like we might not need them, but this is becoming our regular mechanism for handling that, rather than this other contingency fund. Is that relatively accurate?
I think so. And I think it does a couple of things. I think it makes it very clear what that number is, right? As opposed to a sort of random contingency buried in the budget somewhere. You know, you could see it by article number, special ed, regular instruction, right? And it also helps us use some of that undesignated fund balance to try and get in compliance with what the DOE is recommending we should be. Because once they are in these, they are not considered undesignated anymore. They are now designated and they're out of the calculation from the DOE of like how much should you have and how much is too much. Okay.
And so to confirm, if those special ed tech positions aren't filled, those funds would, if this was not in a reserve, but instead in the budget, those funds would have to go into undesignated funds at the end of the year and put us back in a situation of being potentially too close to that 9% or over that 9%.
Yes. Right. So like right now, some of our special ed techs are not filled, right? So the end of the year, those will drop back into undesignated fund balance.
So I guess I hadn't done the very simple math of this before. Is that including, so that's $40,000 per ed tech. Is that just salary or is that including benefits too?
Both.
Both.
Kelly.
It's salary and benefits.
Okay. So if we did hire 6 at magically, wouldn't that be great?
Mhm.
Then that would cover that full cost. Okay. I guess I'm with Colin. I'll just add. I'm with Colin that I had concerns initially about having reserve funds for potential ongoing positions, but I think especially given the tax impact that we're looking at in our budget this year of the 6.48, I think that anything that we can do to keep that down, especially if it's positions we don't know if we'll be hiring for, and keep that out of the like tax impact for the taxpayers, I think that makes sense.
But I do think it's a really good point that if we, probably unlikely, but if we did fill all of these positions, then next year's ask list is probably going to be severely curtailed because we have $500,000 of increased wages out of the gate, right? Assuming they're not all 1-year positions that then go away, right? So I guess just setting that groundwork, I think, is important.
Point, Michelle, my other thought on that is, just anticipating maybe a question from the community, we could say, oh, we don't have these positions this year and we haven't filled them. Do we really need them? We could take that $240,000 in reserve and just reduce our budget. So I feel like this is kind of a compromise between the two, like between not having it at all or asking for it again when we didn't use it this year. I don't know if that makes sense. So to me, it's almost kind of like in the middle of the risk, maybe not the highest, maybe not the lowest. I don't know.
Yeah, but from my understanding of what Dr. Sellers said last time is that we need these 6 positions in order to be in compliance with.
I don't think we do. I think Jean mentioned in her presentation the maintenance of effort standard is
That's
based on the
2.
actual people you have, and because we haven't filled them, we are not reducing them. So it's not like we had Johnny providing services and next year Johnny is not going to be there. We're one less person. Like we have 10 people. We'd like to have 16, but we have 10. So as long as we continue with 10, our maintenance of effort standard is met. Is that correct? My super simplistic view.
That's it. We will not be out of compliance with needs of effort.
Okay, but just given the way that is structured, are you suggesting that if like we then lose 3 of those positions, like or we lose 3 of those people, they have to go on vacation? Then we're down to 7, and then we just have 7. Like in other words, do we need 10 or do we need 16? Or do we need however many we can hire in order to be in compliance with the federal regulations?
In terms of maintenance of effort, this will not, and we're not worried about that in any way, will put us out of compliance with that. I think the other thing we need to remember when we're talking about educational technicians is that students change and students' needs change. And you think like, there may be some seniors who are graduating. There may be some kiddos that no longer need that level of support. So every year we're evaluating what we need. You'll notice we also put in the Article 2, we bumped in extra monies for Moore Street School in anticipation. We haven't had those CDS meetings coming in. They occur in May, but knowing what we know about kids, we're anticipating that we might need that. So that's why we want to put that in there, because we don't want to be in a position to have difficulty programming for children. We'll know more after the budget's already passed, frankly, because after we've had those CDS meetings, we'll know more if we need that. So that's why we're saying, let's establish it, put those dollars in there in anticipation that this might be coming down the pipe, because if they're not there, we're going to be in trouble if we can't hire somebody.
What is thank you for bringing up that specialized K programming. What does that look like? Is that people? Is that like, what is that?
The 150,000,
Mhm.
it would be probably a teacher, and it might be a tech, or it might be particular materials that those kids need for that program. So that's why that's in there for that. We're anticipating that, yes, that's going to happen, but we're not 100% certain until those meetings, those CDS meetings are all done. We know who's really at the table, and also what the needs of those, because some of those children coming in, we've never laid eyes on before, because they're coming in from, they're could be pre-K kids coming into kindergarten or coming into our school for the first time. So we're anticipated based on what we know about kids, based on if we've had some of our folks go out and do some observations, but we really don't know for 100% certain until that piece is done. So we want to make sure that's in contingency. So as we're thinking this is coming down the pike, we're it's looking like it's coming down the pike, but we can definitely pay for it that way. And so we can hire that person or an ed tech, whatever it is we need.
So is this only if CDS programming gets pushed to the schools, or is this
No, 'cause
in any
these-
situation?
Yeah, these kids will be coming regardless. There are children, because it will be great that they're in CDS right now. They'll be transferring into the public school.
Aged out of
Yeah.
CDS.
They'll be coming in.
And why specifically Moore Street and not Pownell and Durham as well?
Because that's where we know the population's coming, is Moore Street.
Interesting. Okay.
I'll just say I'm happy to put I mean, I think this has been a very helpful conversation. I really appreciate Jean, the way that you've been explaining this. I think I guess I will just leave this by saying I remain a little confused about what we mean by like how many special ed techs we need. I think I don't really understand that. I understand that it's based on an evaluation of the need, but like the difference between 10 and 16 seems like pretty damn big. And
I just made up the number 10 and 16. I just took
no,
two
we
numbers,
have-
6 different.
We have way more than 10.
Yeah.
just so you know. We
Okay.
got a lot more than 10.
I was just picking two numbers that
Okay.
were 6 numbers apart.
yeah,
We might have 10 at one
we
school.
shouldn't-
Never believe my numbers. It's not like it's a budget conversation or something.
Yeah, it's not like
So
you're
dollar
not like you're a
signs.
banker. or anything.
Example.
Fair enough. So the 5,000 ed techs we have versus the 5,006, maybe that's not as big a difference. I think it's just, again, I'm just uncomfortable in that space, but that's probably based more on my lack of understanding. But like just on paper, the way this looks is that we're saying to ourselves that really to meet the needs of our kids, we think we probably needed additional 6, and we're not putting in that money. But I understand the way we've talked about it, but just at a certain level, I just don't want us to, I don't know. I just wanted to flag that because I don't want to go into next year or create a structure where we're underfunding our special ed needs.
And one thing I'd just like to piggyback on what you said, Colin, with the six educational technicians, you have to remember we haven't been able to hire them anyway. And we've had money through local entitlement, some through the local budget for 6. We haven't been able to hire them anyway. So that's why a good place is undesignated. We can evaluate the need. Yes, we need them. Yes, we'll hire them if we can find them. But we don't want to push that 240 into the local budget when we're not certain we can hire them. But we need to be able to fund them somewhere. And this helps the overall budget. And you're also going to always have that money right there.
And I think what brought this to a head was they used to be through title funds, and that changed. So then it was like, we either move them all to the local budget, or do we say, do we need them all, and could we fund them a different way? So when it was funding from someone else, It's not, we weren't pulling it from tax dollars.
And we remember we were using carryover money for that too. And that once you spend carryover, it's gone. And so that money's gone from local entitlement.
Oh, now
carryover.
you're just making everyone more confused.
I'll be quiet. I'll be quiet.
All right. How do we feel about the reserve summaries? I appreciate the conversation, Colin, because I had the same thoughts going into, coming out of last week's meeting. Are we just creating a mess down the road for ourselves to deal with a year from now with all these positions that we, subtly approved but didn't have to pay for yet, so it didn't look like we approved in terms of our total budget number. And I appreciate the fact that these are all questions. So maybe the anticipated balance at 0, maybe we can just strike those lines, because I'm not sure I don't think we really know what the anticipated balance will be. And maybe that'll help with, at least it'll help with my confusion. I don't know about anybody else's, but. Except for the ones where, I guess the capital reserve you could leave, because that is expected, right? Like, we know it's going in and coming out for the septic system. So, any other questions on the reserve accounts while we're in this realm? Thank you for the information on the tennis courts. So we're halfway there, more than halfway there. Right? If the goal is to get to 240, we got a couple more years. Well, they assumed a 10% increase, so maybe we double that in one more year. What else? Okay. If folks don't have a specific question or comment on an item or a line item or a section, how are people feeling about 6.5 overall, and then the towns being between 4.6 and 6.7? Kelly.
Yeah, I I just want to acknowledge that 6.5 might feel like a big jump to our taxpayers, and unless you take a close look at the reason why things have gone up, it may seem kind of unnecessary. But I do want to just acknowledge that we've had first of all, we've had a situation where we've been paying for things through COVID funds, and those are now gone, and we're having to push that into the budget. And so all of a sudden we have some pretty big expenses that were paid for by grants, and now we have to pay for them in our budget. We have some clear increases in needs in our schools that are requiring some increases in staffing levels. I think it's been made pretty clear to us that having an assistant principal in Mass Landing is something that we really should do in order to meet the needs of our students and the staff. And the technology, we're having to replace a bunch of technology that we were paying for with COVID funds, and then just inflation. All of our materials are going up in price. Some of the services are going up in price. So even though this seems like it could be a big jump, it's once you kind of dig in and start looking at the needs that we have this year, it seems like our team has done a pretty good job of trying to keep the increase reasonable.
And I don't think, based on what Kelly and Jean said last week, we're out of step with what, unfortunately, everybody's seeing, because everyone had those same COVID funds, funding programming for the last several years. And I actually think ours, excuse me, is better than most around us. That doesn't feel great still, but it's not as bad as next door, but it does seem consistent with what's happening in the market. I assume it's you, Danielle. You look like you're going to say something. You keep half reaching.
Well, I agree with everything that Kelly says, but I still think it's going to be a hard sell to the public, because I don't know that they're going to everybody's looking at the same stuff that we're looking at, or no one's coming to the meetings, and they're not hearing the same things that we're hearing. And that's my fear, is that everybody's just going to see a number and they're not going to like that number. I remember the complaints, and I wasn't on the board last year with the budget, and I remember the complaints already from, the community about the increase from last year. So I don't have any idea of how to make it less, I guess. I feel like everything that we've talked about is needed for the benefit of the students. I think Jean and your team have done a great job doing what's right for the students. So I don't know how we don't do it, but I just think there's going to be some unhappy people, a lot.
Yeah, Danielle, thank you for making that point, because I'm definitely sensitive. I know we all are, to the tax impact and impact of this on the people in our towns. And for several years, I think we did, our budget has not kept up with inflation. It just hasn't. And I think for several years during COVID, we really did forego some things in the budget to keep costs down, because we were sensitive to the fact that people might not be able to work and they might have to stay home with their kids. And it was just a really hard time for all of us. And I think if folks, again, I know it's all like context, and I know that our community members may not be seeing the numbers, but some of the numbers that I'm hearing in surrounding communities of like over 10% or even higher, I think that in the overall like landscape of the increases that I've heard about in other districts, I think we're still, doing our best to be fiscally responsible and meet the needs of our students.
What are I'll ask you guys, what are your odds on, a 6.5 budget passing? Do we feel comfortable bringing that? I mean, I do think there are very reasonable rationale to the numbers, right? You look at historically where we've been, and if you looked at, the cost of inflation over that time period, we are below. So there's some catch up that has to happen there at some point. My question is going to be, I feel that we may get is, in that same year where you're seeing that, is that the right year to be adding additional staff? I don't know. I mean, I don't think the need is not there. I buy into the need for all of these things. It becomes, is it a have to have? Is it a, really, really like to have? Is it we could wait a year? But does waiting a year help us either? I don't know.
I guess I might just go to Danielle. Back to your comment about the frustration that some folks had around the 4.99 last year, which again, I think just like that frustration, that the thinking and the emotional reaction to the impact of that is real and is really important for us to take in consideration. I guess a question might just be, how much of a difference really is there between 4.99 and 6.7 in terms of that reaction? In other words, if we get it back to 4.9, there's if people weren't happy about it last year, those same people are not going to be happy about it this year. So I guess unless we start talking about trying to drive the percentage increase down or make it negative every year, which I think would, from some people's perspective, make them happy, and I guess that's where I don't know what to do with the difference between 4.99 and 6.48, not 6.7. I was quoting from something different. Does that make any sense, Danielle? I don't know why I'm talking to you, but I'm talking to you.
I get that. I just, it's the conversations out again with the public, and I hate to say defending this, but it is kind of that, right? Like saying this is what our kids need. Because I agree with you. Again, I get the requests and I'm fully supportive of the requests. I just, people on fixed budgets, people that are not getting, raises, or people that are out of jobs still. I don't know. I know we can't fix all of that, but I don't.
I'm going to just jump to Malik real quick, and then I'll come on.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I think that 6.48, as we've been hearing, is a number that the public is maybe going to have a little bit of a harder time with. But Michelle, you just mentioned something like, if we cut some things now, what might we be talking about next year in terms of a percentage increase? And if we are able to bring that percentage increase down this year, are we going to be looking at a significantly higher increase next year, and be having an even harder conversation with the public? So I think that's something just to keep in mind. And as I'm looking at this, I'm new to this whole process. So I'm just doing a lot of listening and learning, but as I'm looking at things that we might be able to reduce, I don't see anything that we can reduce that wouldn't have a negative impact on our students and our staff. And I think that's something that we really need to keep in mind as we look at this.
I think that's a great point, right? I mean, our goal is, is it good for kids? We could make the number be whatever we want it to be, but could we do that and, honestly sleep at night saying it was good for kids? Probably not. Kara.
Right. I would echo that. I would love to add more to this budget, but know that that's not reasonable or fiscally responsible. But if our role actually as school board members is to do what is right and best for the students, then I don't think we would want to cut anything from this proposed budget. And I hear your concern, Danielle. I think that there will be some people that are unhappy with that, and that we will have to do some defending. I think that's also part of our role, is that we have to, if people haven't been coming to meetings or they haven't been watching meetings, they might feel surprised by that number and confused by it. And so I think that's part of our role as well, is to explain and reiterate all of the reports that we've received in the meetings thus far, and be able to summarize why we voted for this and why we felt this was important. And I don't know, actually, if you can explain a little bit more too about the Q&A sessions coming up. I mean, those are opportunities. If people are just starting to get involved, they might tune into this meeting and say, I don't understand, or I have questions, and they can come to the Q&A sessions, and then they can come to the meeting next week. Next week, we can't answer questions.
No, we can answer questions. Yeah, okay. Public input. I mean, that's usually more, we don't usually have a lot of folks that come to those opportunities, but that is an opportunity to have if you had a question about something on the budget or you wanted to share feedback, you could get it at that, specifically because that's in advance of us adopting it. So we would want to hear from folks in advance. So then the Q&As are April 10th at Pownell, 6 to 6:30, April 24th at Durham, 6 to 6:30, and May 8th here at the high school from 6 to 6:30. So basically the half hour before our board meeting starts, we have board members, the superintendent, the finance director. So, if you have questions, usually by the May 8th one, folks have received their budget brochures in the mail. So usually people will bring those in and ask questions about those, to help provide some insights. The struggle, Kara, is I 100% agree that it's part of our job to educate people. The struggle is the people that don't seek out any information in advance of June 11th when they walk into the voting booth. And then it's just, then the chips fall where they may, and we deal with the outcome. Yeah. So I will say 499 last year, we passed it in all 3 towns. So, and the only thing I did want to just point out to folks, because this year the tax impact by town is a little bit of a bigger spread than it has been in the last few years. And I don't know if that would raise a question, but if anyone's watching and they have that question, that's really driven by the increase in valuation in the town of Durham. Valuation of Durham, and it's a 3-year average, so it's actually gone up even more than this, but the 3-year average increase for Durham from last year to this year is up 10%. And that drives how much the state says the town is required to put in for that required local contribution. So it's not necessarily a factor of our budget necessarily. It's more the state says your valuation has gone up, so you are therefore required to kick more in before subsidy comes. So if that's helpful. Other questions? Thoughts? Any requests from the admin team for next week in advance?
I guess just one, this is sort of a generic ask of the folks who've been presenting and the broken down sort of itemized pieces. If you feel like there's something that we don't understand about your particular line, if you feel like there's something that when we're talking about it, we're not representing it accurately, that would be really helpful to have that passed on to Jean before next week so that we can just really know we are working with, because we're all in our own heads and on these sheets and we're trying our best to understand your need and what that is on the ground. So I guess I'd just say if there's anything that you like, you're like, they're talking about it like 40%, right? That would be helpful to get that up to closer to like a C-, if not a C.
40% of Will's 50% portion of the wellness person.
Yeah,
who
Will,
was
I just wondered
previously-
if you had like a presentation you could do, like a PowerPoint. Oh, okay.
I'm getting the sense that people feel comfortable with the budget that we have presented in front of us. Nobody loves a number in the sixes. I think that's fair to say, right? But we feel like it's justified, it's appropriate, and that it's our obligation to, put that forward as that's what meets the needs of the district. Usually what happens at the next our meeting next week is we have the public input piece. We have one last chance to deliberate. But I would say that if the board is feeling an inclination, like they would like to see that number less than 6.48, that we give Jean and her team that direction now so that they can come back with items to say, okay, if you want it at 5, this is what we would recommend removing from the budget. It's hard to do on the fly. So if we all came in next week and said, geez, we really wish it could be 5, we're either moving the budget adoption or, it is a magic spreadsheet, but I don't know how magic Kelly's spreadsheet is to be able to, on the fly be able to, well, she can do the math. It's a matter of, prioritizing what would have to come off. So I'm going to give you guys one more opportunity to think on that. Yeah, Colin.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say, sure, that would be helpful to know, like, really, if we did want to knock it down to 4.99, what would you cut first? Like, what from the administration's, like, I mean, I can look at it and start to like tick things off, but I like, so like, again, we can start, like, oh, cut the technology budget in half, or like, don't hire the assistant principal, or don't do the bus replacements, right? Like, but like, I don't know whether we really are in a position to be the ones to say that. But I guess that goes to also in terms of the conversation with the public. I'm currently in a position where I feel like I am more comfortable defending this than I would be a cut budget. Like in terms of our obligation to the kids. I don't think cutting the assistant principal benefits anybody at Mass Landing. It doesn't benefit the kids, it doesn't benefit the teachers, it doesn't benefit the administrator, it doesn't benefit the parents, like to do that. Similarly with the technology. So like I think I'm in a position where I feel more comfortable defending where it is, given the logic of how it's been discussed. But if it would be helpful for the public to know really what that would mean to get it back to 4.99 and really what would those priorities be, sure. But I'm comfortable advocating for this budget as it is.
The only thing I would add to that is maybe a change in language of cutting the assistant principal. It's not a position now. So we're not cutting anyone that's there doing the job now. Right? There's no cut to existing positions contemplated in any of our budget, correct? Other than ones that aren't filled.
Fair enough. Let me change the language.
Yeah, thank you.
Guillotining the imaginary assistant principal that we haven't yet hired.
Now no one's going to apply for that job, Colin. Jesus.
I think Kelly and I are probably thinking the same thing. It might be helpful to the board because to know the dollar. If you're asking us to go 499, we really need to tell you what that dollar figure is. But I think it's important. If that's where you want us to get to, what that would be. I think just Kelly should read. If that's where you want us to be, we
So
just
we
need
got it to 5.
to get to 5. We'll say to get to 5.
579,500.
It's a lot of things. Right? Like that's a lot of things that would have to make up $579,000 after you've already gone back and asked people to get as skinny as they could.
Yeah, I mean, and y'all gave that presentation last week, and that was super, super helpful to have that. Like, and that's the number that's kicking around in my head. So that's where, again, I'm going. Like, again, we could imagine what would be cut, but again, if like you're probably not in a position right now, and it wouldn't win you any immediate prizes with any particular staff members to be like, yeah, let's just cut the technology budget, right? Like, we're just not going to do that, and like, but. Again, if we wanted to have a conversation about like really if we did, like not just the dollar amount, but really if we did, what would be the first thing to go? Because I don't know what that is.
Yeah, just as I look through this summary sheet that they provided for us, it would be a lot of things. Just as I'm going up the priorities, it would be the assistant principal, it would be capital funding, it would be bus replacements, network system administrator, probably cutting into our technology device and equipment replacements. I mean, we're talking about some pretty important items that would be nixed from our budget.
So while I think it's good information to have, I don't know if I guess I'll ask you, Jean. Do you think it's a helpful exercise for you to have that conversation if that's not necessarily what the board's going to do?
I think to get down to 5% increase, it might even not be new asks, but it might be other things. And if that's really not because that's a big difference from where we're at down to 5. And I think that would be a lot of work for our team because we wouldn't be just looking at these sort of where the increases are, because sometimes there are increases. There's nothing you can do about that. I mean, it just is an increase because, for example, you say a bus replacement. We're only requesting one bus replacement. Would we continue with taking down 2? That might not be what we do. We might keep that in as a new request and reduce somewhere else. And that's a big chunk of money. And I don't know, there's a lot of work for our team to really, if you're saying that's the direction, Jean, we want to show us 5. That's where we got to be. We absolutely will do that, and we'll meet and we'll work together collaboratively. But if that's not the direction the board will go, I mean, it's most new requests, but not all, because some you have to have in there. But it's stuff we're already doing right now that we're not going to do potentially. And I think 5%, Frank, I'll just say, I think 5% with that, I think it would be devastating to the school district. And I don't think we would continue to provide the quality education that our children deserve.
I'm comfortable with that answer and not having you go through that exercise. It's a lot of work in a week that I know you guys have a lot of other things to get done in that week. The reality is that we may have to have that conversation, right? I mean, if we go into the 3-town budget meeting and things change, right? We're going to have to figure out where those changes come from. If on June 11th the budget doesn't pass, we have to then revisit the whole thing. My perspective is I think we know it's a reasonable budget. We know what the asks are substantiated and needed. I think we start with that, and then if we have to do something different, then we can and we will. But
I support that.
Yeah, I think that sounds good, Michelle. And also, I was just looking at this really helpful. Again, this was so helpful to have this year. So thank you for this. That the staffing increase that we have in here is and benefit increases for current staffing levels. Like Jean was saying, it's our existing programming, that services, education that we're offering, and that this bottom number that I'm seeing here of total overall expenditure decrease is there's only like $100,000 in there that's not staffing.
Mhm.
And I know we're still in negotiations for the contract, but I think that's something that's good for our community to know. The way that you've broken this down, you found other ways other places where there's been cost savings, and you've put things on here for us to spend, more than $100,000 on technology alone. And, a teacher at Mass Landing, and still, moved the numbers around so that it's going to be the increased cost for our staff plus $100,000. And that's what we're talking about here in that 6.5%. I mean, I think when I was looking at it that way, that's just really striking to me.
Yeah. Okay.
I want to thank Kelly for having the percentage increase numbers of the surrounding towns budgets last time, and I'm wondering if you think that those will be different by next meeting, and if you'd be able to update us, if so, on what the changes might be. I know that all these school systems are in the same process.
Right. They're all doing the same.
So
Yeah.
I just wonder if there's a chance that there would be updated numbers by next week's meeting.
I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to tell which ones are updated and which ones aren't, but we can certainly revisit the list at the next meeting.
Yeah.
Of where they're currently at, and probably I'll probably actually sort them, as well, instead of just randomly reading them off like I did last time, because
we
it's
just
a
threw the
shared
question at
sheet
you.
That's
Yeah.
just kind of all over the place. So
Yeah.
I'll make sure right before the meeting to put some sort of order to it.
Anything else people would like to have for information for next week to feel prepared and equipped to adopt a budget? No? I see processing happening, 2 people over, so I'm going to give them a second. You're good? All right. People, Kara? I love reading facial expressions, who do I think is about to say something?
I'm just wondering, I know there's been a lot of work on the budget brochure already up to this point, and the 10-year adopted budget history page that will be, well, actually, what do we include in the budget brochure that shows our budget expenditure increase? Is there something in there?
I'm looking at Kelly, who's getting in her magic
that?
backpack that has where we're at this very moment.
I vaguely remember seeing that in the drafts,
Yeah.
and I'm just wondering if we would want to add a couple of sentences explaining why it was so low right. That is because of the COVID funds that we received. That if we hadn't received those COVID funds, there's a good chance the percentage increase would have been higher.
So the budget history is in the budget handout, not in the brochure that goes home to every home.
Okay.
So it's not in here.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, Is that still being updated?
Oh,
then? So that will continue.
Ginny is
to be-
jumping up and down right now. No, you
Oh.
cannot change.
So
the
she's probably going to be
margin.
flying down here even as we speak. So
You
the
add one page, you add four.
You
And
add
maybe
four,
there's
yeah.
already a sentence,
And
just like 2 sentences.
and that's not, so what Kelly's saying, that's not, that chart is not in the budget brochure.
right.
It's in the handbook.
And
So in
that
the
is-
handbook, we could, because that's public,
Okay.
we could do
Yeah,
it there.
yeah.
We could do it there.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Sorry, what's the difference between a brochure and a handbook?
So, gosh, Colin. So this is our handbook. Doesn't say it though, does it?
Michelle, let me do this.
This is the handbook, and it starts with the first budget that comes out to us, and then every time we update it, it gets crossed out with a new date. This shows the enrollment. It shows the 10-year budget history. It shows the changes, so that the chart that everyone really likes to share with the increases and the reductions in the summary, as well as by article, and then the breakdown of kind of our 2-page budget impact summary, and then contribution by town, and then the reserve information. So this is really budget information. And then the handbook has a variety of things in it. And the handbook gets mailed by us to every, it doesn't look all
I thought that was the
different
I thought that was the
than this.
handbook.
What?
Wait,
So the handbook is
I know
what
this
we
is the
get every time we come to a meeting.
so what's that?
This isn't what it looks like. It looks more like a news. Well, it does look like this, but it's like a newspaper, and it gets mailed to your house. Look, it's got a postal customer on the back and your address, and this is the budget brochure. So it's got like a little blurb on each school. It does have class sizes and the number of kids. It's got enrollment information, budget process, so they can see the process, the warrant articles. Obviously, it does have the summary, the 2-page summary from the handbook, and the reserve accounts from the handbook, and then some benchmarking, how we compare to other districts in our cohort.
Okay, groovy. So I think just from a in terms of our communications, the brochure is what everybody gets in the mail. And then the handbook is what we have available if people want to get a little bit more into it when they come to the meetings. I mean, obviously it's available online as well. But to your question, Kara, you were asking if could we add some language, even if Jenny then got out the guillotine that I was talking about earlier. Could we add some language to the brochure to talk narratively about the percentage increase, the history of that? Is that accurate?
Well, I was thinking that this chart was in the brochure, but it is not. It's in the handbook, and so I think if we can just add a couple of sentences to the handbook instead of adding a whole page to the brochure.
I think there's also a way in the superintendent's letter
I
that
was like, I'm like, this
I will
page right
leave it
here.
in there. That's
The
why I
budget
will leave that in
context.
there. So I'll have a piece in there too.
I mean, I'm going to be fully honest. I'm not sure I've ever read this page of the budget. But I hear you tell us all the time.
Jean, I read it over and over and over again every year. I read it to my family.
So the idea, it's literally called budget context. So I think that's a perfect place for it. So, and I will read it thoroughly this year.
And Michelle, can you remind me when that gets mailed?
So it goes to the printer the day after we adopt the budget. So once we adopt the budget, off it goes. So it's already sort of set and ready, most of it. And then once the final numbers are determined next week, when we adopt the budget, the final pages get put in and it goes to the printer. It usually comes out. I feel like the panel people don't always have it in their hand by the time we have the panel Q&A, but usually by the Durham meeting, some of the people in panel do. It's weird with the mail out there. Yeah. So it usually gets to houses mid-April, say. Yeah. All right. Are people comfortable concluding our budget deliberations for the moment? I haven't heard from you today, Candy or Cheyenne. Anything? You good? Yeah. It's a lot. I know. Yeah. Okay. So we have no new business. We have no personnel. We're back to public comment. Still no one. So I would take a motion to adjourn. Kelly and Kara, thank you. All those in favor? None opposed.